We need to be philosophers, not religious. Like, our religion needs to be philosophy.
What's the point? Is there any meaning? Is there any value? I mean, like, remember now, without God, Dr. Carrier, there's no meaning and no value. You have no morality. You have nothing you can stand on. And I see this all the time.
Right.
So question, and then we will have fun with it.
Yeah.
Thank you for being a Patron member. I told you I'd make a video just for you, asking the question of the expert. Look, I don't see anyone else do this on this level. And so for that much, get behind what we're doing, join the family, help support what we're doing. We can really use it. And if it weren't for you, we couldn't keep going. Question for Dr. Carrier. In sense and goodness without God, you build a comprehensive worldview. How do you personally reconcile the vast, indifferent cosmos described by naturalism with the human need for meaning and purpose? Is meaning something we create, something we discover, or is it an illusion we must live with?
Yeah, that's a good question. The reference to sense and goodness, I actually have a new edition of that that's going to come out next year, so people should be looking forward to that. There's a lot that's happened in the 20 years since I published that book, so a lot of good stuff on that. And this is one of the ones, the meaning of life. So I wrote a new article recently, well, relatively recently, called 10 Ways the World Would Be Different If There Was a God. And I think one of the ones that I do in there is the meaning of life. But if it's not in there, it's in my Bayesian counter-apologetics article where I have a meaning of life thing, and I talk about this, essentially. But I want to talk about it more in my next revision of Sense and Goodness. I do talk about it there. Where does meaning come from, and so on. And the short answer, of course, is, yeah, it's both invented and discovered, right? So we create it, but we create it by discovering things that are worth valuing. And it really does come down to what's worth valuing. Like, it's not really meaning. Like, you could talk about meaning in terms of that you want to matter. That's one sense of meaning. But of course, that's easy to achieve by simply mattering to other people, right? So you don't need a God for that. Like, as long as there's other people, you can matter to them. You can do things that matter to them and so on. You can publish, you can help, you can be present, you can be a friend, a lover, etc. Like, there's lots of ways that you can matter as a person in your life. And so that need is easily met because we're social animals and there's a bunch of people you can do this.
No
It's
need
really
for
just,
God, right.
yeah, it's just, yeah, other people that you can interact with and have different kinds of relationships with, including with relationships with community, relationships with nation, relationships with the global population, and so on, with all of this. But oftentimes when people talk about meaning of life, they're lumping a bunch of other things in there, right? They're telling me, like, well, why should I care about any of it? Like, why should I care about whether I matter, and so on? Like, it's getting more meta, getting more deeper into this. And that's really coming down to values. Like, why should you value anything? And I wrote another article called The Objective Value Cascade, where I posit, like, let's posit we turn on an AI, and a true AI, not the bogus AI that we have now, like a real general AI. We turn it on, and it has only one value, and its only value is to be rational. And that's it. And it gets to choose which values to have. So it's not pre-born with hunger or drives or anything like that. It's not pre-born with a desire to be loved, for instance, that we are actually as social animals. What would it then choose? What values would it choose? And you can actually reason through that there's actually a different way to look at multiple paths. And this is actually the way that I've gone through my life too, philosophy-wise, is that every decision you make, you can think, and these are two possible worlds that can exist, and you can sit there and you can compare them. It's like, which one would I rather be in, right? Like, so you make a decision, you're switching between those two worlds. So you have to think, well, which one do I want? And that's the decision you make, right? Is to move towards the world you want to be in. And when you think in those terms, you can actually work out what kinds of values are better to have. And that gets to the whole idea of why value living. And there's a lot of reasons that you can give. And I cover this in Sense and Goodness. One of them is just the mere fact that we are able to be conscious, like we are the way for the world to know itself. Like that's a thing that doesn't exist in any other sense other than the fact that we can do it. That you can live in the moment and just, you get the gift of being able to experience being and knowing and experiencing things, right? So that in of itself, like, you can have two alternative worlds, one where you just don't exist and that doesn't happen, or a world in which you get to be able to do that, and you can decide and say, that's actually a better world. I like that world better. And even that AI would agree because it would say like, well, I don't get anything in the nothing world, right? But in this world, I get something, right? Like, because there's actually something worth pursuing. It's at least interesting, right? So there's so that you can build your values on that, and then you can stack those up in terms of where you get to like, why should I be an honest person? Why should I be a compassionate person? You can do the same kind of reasoning and get the same result, and even that AI would get the same result in thinking. Now, of course, you would have to program that AI to really care about rationality and correctly define rationality. And what's going to happen, of course, is corporate moguls will design their AIs to have values that they want, and so they'll be probably psychotic and fucked up. But this sort of pure AI that I'm describing, I think would, if you gave it access to the information it needed, it would land on the same conclusions that I am.
What if we, and I'm playing a complete hypothetical here. What if, I love your jab back, however, I'm just making up something here, okay?
Yeah.
What if they did a complete scientific compute and like, hey, we want the best for what the Earth needs, right? And AI, and we end up in a Terminator situation where AI realizes that we as a species are not actually good for this Earth, and it decides that we need to go extinct because we are.
Right.
It's almost like the famous Prometheus movie, the
Yeah.
Alien series, where they once made us, but then they sent like one of their own, which they're claiming is Jesus, and
Right. Yeah. I know the story.
killed them. And then they're like, no, we realized
You guys are savages. We got to get rid of you.
that's why the creators want you gone. So what if AI realizes that the best thing is, there's some good in humanity, but overall, we're headed in a path. It can predict the models.
Yeah.
It can somehow see that this is not going to end well, and it's going to be nothing but more humans suffer in the long run. So it decides to try and take us out.
Yeah, right. First of all, it's very unlikely that's the conclusion it would.
I'm just saying,
right? And if you had, let's assume that it's a true rational AI and it's getting true information and it has all the information it needs, and it does come to that conclusion, then probably so would you. Right. So that's the thing is, so that you're writing on a massive hypothetical that,
Of course.
all the doors you open are going to have exactly the right evidence in them, all of which is very improbable. So the whole scenario is very improbable. It's very unlikely. And so the reason to like not care about that is that it's improbable. What would happen more likely is that you have an AI that's programmed to be greedy and in service to corporations, and it makes a bunch of fucked up bad decisions and decides to kill everybody, but it's doing it irrationally, right? It's because you've programmed it to want irrational things. And so that's the risk of AI, really comes from the programmers giving it fucked up values rather than truly training it on rational values, right? But there's other things, like I talked about the experience, like just the ability to know and experience in and of itself has value over nothing. And it does simply because of itself, like it's the self-justifying value. You don't need some other reason.
Or some
Like God doesn't need to tell you that experiencing life is better than not experiencing life. You can directly confirm that yourself.
It's almost another hypothetical of saying like, what's the point? There's no meaning to life because you're not going to have one after this. And it's like, but you have this one, dude. Like,
Yeah,
how do you get someone to stop thinking about
honestly, like having a short amount of it means you should use it better, not like get rid of it, right? You don't want to like, oh, I got $1 billion. Fuck it, I'm gonna burn $999,999, and then I'll have $1. It'll be awesome. Like no one thinks that way, right? Like, so if you've got a certain amount of money, you're gonna make the best of that money. Same with life, any other resource, right? So yeah, that kind of logic doesn't work. But the other thing is, you get back to this AI thinking about alternative worlds, or you yourself thinking about alternative worlds, comes to love, right? So you have the idea of, we have, through evolution and various things, been able to have the experience of love, loving others and others loving us, right? And so if you have this AI, what doesn't have that evolution, it just has this rational motive to work through, like, what value should I have? It can decide, it can create both worlds, simulate both worlds, a world in which the computer chooses to have that value, that actually the evolved value for enjoying love, being loved, etc., or go on without that, right? And not only can it compare those two, it can actually like simulate the two conversing with each other and with it, and it could say to the no love version of it, like, would you rather be this one, right? And so it would look at, and you can see, like, between triangulating, like the original computer would rather be the love enjoying one because there's so much more value to gain there, whereas there isn't over here. And the love love absent one who then learns about the love access one is going to go, actually, I would prefer to be there. So if you and your alternate both agree you'd rather be there, well, now you know which decision to make. You should choose to have those values. So everything in terms of meaning, like where we generate meaning, some of it comes from the intrinsic value of things. It only has value to us. It's not cosmically value. There's like if humans didn't exist, nothing would have value because there wouldn't be any people. There has to be, yeah, or right, any alien AI, doesn't matter. Like some consciousness has to exist,
Right.
because value comes from the consciousness, person, individual. So the question is, what values should you have? That's the thing. And some of this we got inborn, but that we can still interrogate. And that's why I use the AI model, where we eliminate that question. Is like, well, were we just evolved to have this way or whatever? But if you do the AI model, you can start to think, and you notice that that's also a sim of an alternate version of us, right? Which allows us to think like, actually, which evolved things are of value in of themselves, that it's not happenstance or random or whatever, that they have intrinsic value to any consciousness. And that's where my objective value cascade is about, where the intrinsic value comes from the relation between an existing conscious agent and obtainable goods, right? It's not inherent in the world or anything. And God is not even a part of the conversation. Like, God's irrelevant to this, right? So all meaning comes that way. And ultimately, really, like even Christians, they're driving meaning from the same way that we are. They just claim that it's coming from God, or they need God for it. If you really sat down and analyzed it, like God is kind of he's a useless outlier, right? He's kind of like angels pushing the planets when we already have gravity doing it, right? Like it's an unnecessary epicycle that you don't need in that. So in terms of chasing meaning, this is what you should be doing in terms of this. We don't need God for it. It's not relevant.
There's a hypothesis by John Wathy. He wrote a book called The Phantom God and the Illusion. They're both like they're completely scientific, and they're about what God is for the atheist, like,
Yeah,
to explain what it is in a scientific way of what's going on with the human
right.
psychology, the whole nine, right? And in this, it's so interesting. The phantom armed experiment,
Yeah,
where they get you and you think it's really your arm, but
Yeah,
they've wired your brain to something that doesn't exist.
that's right. Yeah.
Well, that analogy applies to God, and he starts with birth, pointing out that children were all wired right to the mother inside, and ultimately he gets into this point about how facial recognition, we're evolved inside the womb to recognize faces, and he's going through all this science. I've done a few interviews with him, but they're amazing. At the end of the day, he ends up ultimately concluding that God, and this is why, if you just look at the history of religions, there were goddesses and gods, right? Fathers and mothers, that it all completely evolves from the natural, intuitive, what we've experienced as humans in our youth, from mothers and fathers, and that we just kind of catapult that to that next level, that 1 degree beyond. So what happens is when you're a baby, you're crying for milk, to give the analogy for the viewer.
Yeah.
You're crying for milk, right? You are not even consciously aware of what you need. You're like subconsciously drawing in, and it's almost like the reward system. Like, oh, if I do this, mom will start bringing it, and you start realizing patterns that work to keep you going. And ultimately, when you now detach from your parents growing up, that child in you will always, be there in some sense. And oftentimes it's easier to cry out to God as father, mother,
Right. Yeah.
now that you've lost mother, father. And it's like, it makes so much sense the way he described it, where it's like, no wonder we posit
Yeah.
these
It's a psychological artifact. Yeah. There's a lot of science behind that. There's more to it than that.
Of course.
Like Dennett's book, Breaking the Spell, is like one of the best summaries, because this is a whole field of study. The psychology of religion is a real scientific field. We have
This ties into me.
we have neuroscience of religion.
Right.
We have actual science behind all of this. There's a lot to it in terms of like agency over detection and a lot of other aspects of what's going on. And then there's a history, true, like you start with babies. Babies start as solipsists, where they think they're God, that like they control everything, right? And then gradually they learn they don't control everything. And then, oh, well, it's the parents or the caregivers that control everything, so they're the gods. And then, of course, eventually they figure out that they don't control. Like when kids get to the point where they realize their parents don't control the rain, that's when you starting to break from like, oh, you're in an existential crisis. And I was like, well, then who does control the rain?
That makes
And
sense.
so it's easy to like interject like, oh, Santa Claus does, right? Like,
My daddy's invincible.
right, yeah.
Well, dad's not invincible.
Right. Oh, it's the same thing. Yeah, right. Yeah, yeah, like they're invincible, and then suddenly you realize they're not, right? Like these are these moments when you realize your gods don't exist. And so that's that moment where you can kind of like go through the pangs of that and like come to terms with it. Or someone could sell you a bill of goods that sort of fills the blank, and it's just easier to keep believing in Santa Claus, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that all of that stuff is true in terms of it, but none of that like deals with the question. Like, there's two sides to this. Like, one is the God you culturally just end up with. Like, why would that God give your life meaning? Like, what is it? What can it do that the things themselves that you appreciate don't already do, right? Like can God really tell you to want to burn in hell, right? Like that, like you know what I mean? Like, it's something like you don't need God to tell you that being on fire forever would be bad, right? Like that, that's not necessary. And so the heaven and hell thing really becomes a sort of like just world theory kind of thing. It doesn't really have to do with the meaning of life. It has to do with, I want the world to be more perfect and just, and so I'm just going to invent this sort of fake version of the world.
Or bad people had success in this life.
Yeah.
And they need to get their
Right. And yeah,
punishment.
so this gets to the whole thing that you and I were talking about off camera about ambiguity tolerance and intolerance. And so like highly conservative religious minds have high ambiguity intolerance. So they're intolerant of uncertainty or ambiguity, grays versus black and white. And so like you're talking about like, why do bad things happen to good people? The famous the book title. But it's not completely random, right? But it is not also governed. It's right. So there is some random distribution in terms of like the luck and bad luck gets distributed regardless of character, right?
Yeah.
That's the case. But behaviors like moral versus immoral behaviors have statistical effects. So like if you want to be like, it could be you have a decision, or you could do a moral thing or an immoral thing, and the immoral thing will have a 20% chance of a good outcome, but the moral thing will have an 80% chance of a good outcome.
You're going to want to do the good.
You're going to want to do that, but remember, it's risk theory. It's only 80%, so you're going to fail. It's going to fail sometimes, but it's going to fail less often than the other one.
It's like
This is a really complicated, ambiguous thing where it's like, well, they both could fail. It's like, yes, you're playing the odds.
What's that Bush's noise? Is that a bear or lion? You go with it's a bear or lion.
Yeah. Well, that gets to agency overdetection, which is that in terms of how our brain circuit overdetects agency,
Right.
because the cost of being wrong, like the cost of a false positive is much lower than the cost of a false negative. So it's actually to our survival advantage to overdetect. And this gets to the question of, well, okay, so then we get to the rational brain that can now question this sort of like we have an imperfect detection system. Like it's designed by evolution to be erroneous.
Right.
And so you have to like have your rational control over it. But then this gets back to the meaning of life thing, where when people talk about like, well, you evolved to want love, for example, then it's like, but is that just an arbitrary thing? Like we evolved to want to eat nuts, right? Like it's just random. Like it could we question our programming? And the question is obviously yes, because we also evolved to be we're inherently violent like this. This is built into our neurology and our bodies and everything. So the question is that, yeah, you can question your programming. And so then the question becomes, well, if you can question your programming, how do you get a right answer if you're relying on your programming to decide which programming is correct, right? So you get this. So that's why models.
That's why presuppositionalists love just going, no, you
yeah.
need to point to something else.
Yeah.
Because you're relying on the faulty system.
But that's why you have to have, or why you can benefit from these simulated models that you're working through, the hypothetical, like the thought experiment of this perfect AI that you could reason out what it's doing. And then think like, would you think the same way? And so it allows you to actually make this decision. There are objective facts that you can use to adjudicate between good and bad programming. So that's entirely possible, right? So it's harder work. It requires like more knowledge and wisdom and stuff. There's no easy answers. And I think if you have high ambiguity intolerance, you want easy answers. You don't want to do all this work. You don't want there to be an uncertain answer or something that's you don't want 80%. You want 100%, right? So, and you don't want to have to do the work. You want a book that just says, okay, just tell me what I'm supposed to do. Give me the book that says. And that allows then people to take advantage of that by writing a book and saying, this is from God. It's exactly what you're asking for. But then it asks them to do a bunch of shitty things, right? So like it's the way people can control people because they're prone to want the easy answers. They want the sort of simple way of doing it. You really need to do the complicated way. We need to be philosophers, not religious. Like our religion needs to be philosophy. And that's one of the things I talk about in Sense and Goodness without God. And yeah, you can get to meaning. It does come from objective reality as well as subjective choice. So there's a measure of both. It's a mixture of things that are true and things that we discover and things that we choose. But it's not an illusion. The illusion would be like, oh, I'm going to live forever. I get to live in Zardoz after I die, right? Or whatever. Like that would be the illusion, the idea of you're immortal. You can't be killed. Like as soon as you die, you'll just wake up in a better place. It's going to be awesome. That would be an illusion, right? An elusive understanding of how things operate. So if you want to get rid of the illusions, is anything left over? And the answer is yes. And that's what I talk about in Sense and Goodness.
Thank you.